Good morning, everyone. Hi, Joe. Oh, I've got someone who's raised their hand. Go ahead. If you need to put anything into the chat, just let me know. We're going to wait a couple of minutes until everybody is sort of joining. In the meantime, do you mind putting into the chat for me who you are, where you're from, and just a little bit about you, potentially which phase you're teaching, and a little bit about your background? That would be great, so I can get a bit of an idea about who is here. Good morning, Joe. We've got two Joes. Good morning, Stephanie. Lovely to see you in the chat. Who else have we got? Good. We've got Heather from Northern Ireland, teaching primary Spanish. Good morning, Heather. Lovely to see you in the chat. We will be doing examples in French today, but it can all be applied to any language really. Hi, Hannah from West Sussex. Lovely. Hi, Ellie, Kelly. Hi, Ellie from Kelly in Somerset. Morning, year 3. Lovely. Joe's in Essex with primary French and Spanish. Joe is in Richmond and in Surrey, specialist French teacher. Brilliant. Dorset. Morning, Samantha. Brilliant. Hampshire. Good morning. Brilliant. Well done. Oh, this is fantastic. I've got so many now coming through. Charlie, good morning. Pamela, good morning. We've got people from Swindon, people from Kent, Hampshire, as I've just mentioned, lots of people in the south. I'm wondering if we're going to have anybody from further north. Oh, Charlie's coordinating a bunch of primary specialists. That's brilliant. Yeah, that's really, really good. And secondary trained. Great. Fantastic. Lovely. Right. So we've got quite a few people in so far, and I'm sure others will be joining as I begin to speak. Oh, Ramesh, hi, from Leicester. Brilliant. I'm in Leicester as well, so hello and good morning. Curious about Key Stage 2, but working in a specialist in Key Stage 3 and 4. Brilliant. And how to support SEND students. And I think that's really, really a really useful point to make, Ramesh, that actually lots of these things that I'm going to be covering today will be applicable to secondary colleagues as well. So those who are working in secondary schools and are specialists in secondary languages. So I can see that quite a few people have joined already. I'm just going to give it one more minute. So pop into the chat if you have anything to say about introducing yourself. I am going to, oh, interesting. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen with everybody so that we can all see what's going on. And I wonder if that will allow me to still see the chat. Not very well. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so I can keep an eye on the chat just quickly. So this morning, I'm going to be presenting to you regarding supporting SEND learners in the primary classroom. But there's obviously going to be a time afterwards for questions and answers. So I'm going to leave the question session until the end. Could you please put questions into the Q&A section rather than into the chat, because that's going to be a little bit easier for me to keep an eye on then, so I can see exactly what's coming in, and I can put all of that information, or help to answer all those questions as I go through, rather than having to scroll back through the chat. So if you would like to put anything into the chat to introduce yourself, I can see that we've got 25 people in so far, which is great. Just pop your name, your phase, and what you teach into the chat. That would be really helpful. And if you have any questions as I'm going through, put them into the Q&A section. Okay, so I'm going to get started now because we are a few minutes in, so I think people can join sort of as they get here, as Zoom allows them to get in. But I'm going to begin today just by introducing myself. My name is Ellie. I am a primary qualified teacher, primary trained teacher. And I'm actually now working as a French specialist teacher at an inner city primary school in Leicester, as I just mentioned. I'm going to be talking to you today about an engaging and enriching and inclusive curriculum for SEND primary learners. But as I've mentioned, that can really be applied to secondary as well, for those of you who are here from a secondary background. I'm not a SENCO, so I'm not an SEND coordinator, but I do work in a school with a very, very high percentage of SEND children, as well as actually EAL children, so children who speak English as an additional language. So over the years, I've really had to adapt my teaching to ensure that all the pupils that I teach can access their French learning. And the aim of today is to really get you thinking about all of the great things that you're already doing as practitioners to support SEND learners in your MFL classrooms, and also thinking about some tried and tested strategies that I've used in my particular setting that I've found to be really helpful and can be easily replicated and hopefully make the world of difference for your SEND pupils. So we all know already that we have a statutory duty to modify our programme of study so that all children, regardless of their background or their ability level, are able to access a broad and balanced curriculum. And this is a big focus of Ofsted, this broad and balanced curriculum. I've recently had a deep dive into MFL at my school a few weeks ago, so I know that this is something that they're really concentrating on, and SEND provision is a big part of that. And I had to answer a lot of questions about what I was doing for the SEND pupils that I teach. And of course, when we use this term SEND pupils, we need to be quite careful because the needs of SEND pupils are as sort of diverse and complex as the children themselves. Two different children with the same diagnosis even might have very, very different strengths and weaknesses, for example. But one of the really fantastic things about introducing a new language to children at primary level, because I introduce French in Key Stage 2. The really great thing about this is that it's an opportunity for children to experience a subject in which they don't have potentially this kind of history of what they might call failure. And you might hear a lot of SEND pupils using language similar to this, saying things like, I'm not very clever, or I'm not very good at this. And really, as they get higher up the school, this is something that I've noticed that children do quite a lot. And they may be quite aware that they're not top of the class or whatever. And I think that when we introduce a new language at Key Stage 2, what we're actually doing is we're levelling the playing field, because everybody is starting from scratch again. And this can be a really confidence building thing for children who have specific learning needs. And of course, because they have specific learning needs, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't find great enjoyment and success when learning a language, as we all know. So we're going to start off first of all by thinking about getting the basics right. And as I go through this list, I'm sure that there's lots of things that you'll recognise that you're already doing in your setting. But I think it's really important that we just refresh ourselves on these ideas. So first and foremost, we need to have a think about making sure that pupils feel safe and they feel relaxed. And they need to feel this way in all subject areas, of course, but in language learning, there's going to be an expectation for them to speak, for them to make errors, of course, as they're learning. And what we don't want children to feel is that they might be made fun of by their peers, for example. So we need children to be supportive of each other, the expectation that children are respectful of each other. And this is also very important as children move further up the school, and they may begin to feel that they place more importance on the opinions of their peers, for example. If we're thinking about children with who might be on the autistic spectrum, so we're talking about ASD children, starting the lesson and finishing the lesson in the target language, bonjour, hola, whatever it is, and then finishing the lesson off in the target language for them makes a really clear demarcation that language learning is about to start now, and it's going to be finished now as well. So they know exactly what to expect, and there's a level of routine about that for them. Also thinking about ASD, we might want to think about monitoring our noise levels. So for example, this noise monitor, which I actually found during lockdown, is really, really great because it's a screen that allows you to do many really cool things actually. But one of the best things that I found about it was this sound level monitor. And obviously I'm very close to my microphone at the moment, so I sound very loud, but you can use this to help children to monitor the level of their noise when they are speaking in class, because a lot of children find it very distracting for it to be very, very loud. Thinking about children who may have attention deficit disorders and find it quite difficult to organise themselves, those sometimes quite chaotic children that I'm sure we all recognise, making sure that they have all the equipment that they need ready at the start of the lesson, checklist if they need it, to make sure that they're not wasting any learning time by worrying about where their pen or their pencil or whatever is. Thinking about dyslexic pupils, making sure that our boards and our printouts are in an off-white colour so that we avoid that glare of black print on white paper. And if you've got any children with visual impairments, then enlarging resources as necessary for them. So these are our basics. And now we're going to sort of move on a little bit to differentiation. And we know that when we're talking about children with SEND and their access to learning during lessons, we're largely talking about how we're going to differentiate to make it possible for them to access the learning. And Carol Ann Tomlinson, who we really can say is the godmother of differentiated instruction, tells us that differentiation is responsive teaching. And we know that that's true. We know that differentiation is key to ensuring that all of our children make progress during lessons. But what does that actually look like? And of course, differentiation is a huge term which encompasses so much of what we do as practitioners. But I think it's really helpful to break it down into three areas, which are differentiation by content, differentiation by process, and differentiation by output, and to explore what they're going to look like in context, because they may be slightly different. So we're going to start off by looking at differentiation by content and how we use resources to support curriculum content for SEND pupils. Content is, of course, the knowledge and the concepts and the skills that children need to learn based on the curriculum. However, the way that SEND pupils gain access to that content is necessarily very different. And in the case of SEND learners, there may need to be quite a different range of support in place to allow them to engage with and, most importantly, to retain the content. So what's that going to look like in practice? Well, the great news is that so much of what we do as teachers of languages really that we do automatically, I suppose, in a way, naturally support SEND pupils and all children, in fact, to access the linguistic content of lessons. So the use of visual clues is just one example. So, for example, we might use gestures, or we might use mime, or we might use a signing system like Makaton, for example, to support the understanding of key language in the target, key vocabulary in the target language. And that's really helpful for SEND pupils. The same can be said of the use of images to support vocabulary learning. So this might take the form of flashcards or mini card games like pairs and things like that we might get the children to play, or pictures next to keywords on wall displays. The use of visual stimuli is really, really helpful for those children who have SEND, and also for those who are new to English, because it removes the process of translation. So images are really, really helpful. But one important point to remember, I think, when using visuals to introduce new vocabulary is to make sure that the images are really simple, that they're clearly understood by all pupils. So there's no distractions, there's no chance to misinterpret the image, for example. And also, really importantly, to keep images consistent across all of your materials. So if you've got flashcards with une pomme and one particular picture of an apple, make sure that you've got that same picture matching that vocabulary everywhere that you go. Really nicely linked to this is Sue Cave and Jean Haig's really brilliant physical French phonics, where an image and an action is attached to a particular sound, a particular phoneme and a grapheme in French. And what's really great about physical French phonics, and there's a physical Spanish phonics version as well, is that it actually enables you to trigger pupils' memory by simply doing an action. So, for example, the j sound in French is made by sort of a car zooming. And sometimes if a child can't remember, or they're trying to break down, decode a word, or they just can't quite get their head around a particular sound, sometimes all I need to do is do the action, and then the pupils are able to remember the sound and also the grapheme that matches with it. So using actions and images, again, linked together with phonics, which is really, really helpful. And this leads us really nicely onto our multisensory approaches, or multimodal approaches, which I find really hard to say. So, for example, many children with SEND might learn best by doing, and lots of pupils learn best by doing. So bringing in that multisensory or multimodal element to learning can really help to embed key language, because it acts as a hook on which the children can hang that new learning and those constructions. So, for example, children expressing their opinions on something, so their opinions on fruit, which is something that I do as a unit of work on La Surprise de Anda, Hand of Surprise. The children actually taste the fruit so that they're able to give their opinion. Or here is an example from one of our Bastille Day celebrations, which we try to do every year, COVID allowing. And this is Au Café. The children have learnt some vocabulary about different foods and different drinks, and then they use that vocabulary to order from other pupils who are their waiters and waitresses to order the food that they want and to get it delivered to them at their table. So they're actually using their language in a very real, multifaceted way to get something which they then get to eat. Food's a really good motivator, isn't it? I think for everybody, but definitely in primary schools. Okay. So what I'm going to lead on to now a little bit is just some of the areas that that I find that SEND pupils sometimes struggle with in terms of their language learning, and really to introduce some nice, simple ideas to help support the content in these particular incidences, starting off with listening. So listening activities can be a little bit tricky for SEND pupils for a number of reasons. It may be, for example, that they find auditory processing very, very challenging, so they can't process information at the same speed as potentially other children might. And that makes listening activities, for example, quite challenging, because they're having to listen and then they're having to respond to that in some way. So many of my classes love and really loved during lockdown, because these were really easy to create for them during lockdown. They really loved doing these close activities where they sort of fill in missing information, and I'm sure that you've all done these with your classes before. And for a child who is a rapid grasper, for example, I can say something, they can follow along with the text, and they can quite easily fill it in. They don't find that too challenging. But for some of my SEND pupils, that's going to be really, really difficult. So what I tend to do is I'll provide them with some kind of key, as I've shown here, where not only is the word written down for them in French, but they also have a little image which matches to that word, which allows them then to fill in the missing information correctly, using a spelling to help them, but also using an image to help them. When we're thinking about reading as well, there's a lot of difficulty I find around really unfamiliar texts. So as the children go further up in their Key Stage 2 learning, the expectation is that they're going to start engaging with texts where they're not going to know what all of the words are, and they're going to have to use a range of strategies to kind of work out the meanings of these words. And one of these strategies might be that they may need to use a bilingual dictionary, and bilingual dictionaries are quite tricky to use, especially for some children who may not have a full grasp of alphabetical order, for example. So they're given this enormous dictionary and they're having to find particular words. So what I tend to do as a step towards that using of the dictionary is to use something like a glossary. And the glossary has all of the unknown words that the children are going to encounter in the text. This is from a unit of work on les prédateurs, so predators. And what I've done is I've color-coded all of the vocabulary. So we've got our verbs in red, for example, our nouns in green. And I've also, if needed, provided a little picture which might help them with the nouns. And then they can use this glossary. So they're still practicing the really important skill of being able to look up words, and they're understanding, they're growing their understanding of alphabetical order, but they're doing it in a much less challenging way than if they were using a bilingual dictionary, for example. I might provide them with a simplified text as well, but quite often I like them to all access the same thing but have the different support. We might also want to think about scaffolding, speaking and writing, because we know, as in English lessons, for those of us who are in primary, children should be exposed to lots and lots of talk for writing before they actually put pen to paper. And games like Trapdoor, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, are really great for this. So this one is an example of one that I created for a unit of work on Ours Brun, Brown Bear. And the children are creating sentences describing what they can see. I see a yellow duck or whatever it is. But what I've done here is I've color coded it so that in fact the children can access this learning at whichever level they feel most confident. So for example, the red section is quite simply just saying I see and then an animal, je vois un canard. If the children want to extend their learning a little bit further, they want to challenge themselves a bit more, they might add in a color. So je vois un canard jaune, par exemple. So they're adding into the orange section. And then finally, they may want to add in some further information by using a conjunction, et or avec, and then adding in another animal and another color. So what they're doing here is they're being able to extend their sentences as far as they feel that they want to. And this no ceilings approach, which I think is really, really important when it comes to SEND learners, allows all pupils to access the same content. So they all have the potential to create as long a sentence as they want, but they do it as far as they feel comfortable. And of course, you'll have some SEND pupils who will go all the way to the end and go all the way to the end of the green section and produce a sentence which is as complex as a child that they might consider to be more able than them. And that's a really great confidence boost. A similar style, which is one that I was inspired by Claire Seckham to do actually, is this one. So it's a slightly different way of speaking, slightly differently arranged speaking frame, if you like. Here, the children are practicing singular and plural. So when they're talking about brothers and sisters, they might just want to choose from the first section and go to the singular. They might want to go to the plural, or they might want to extend themselves into the green area, which is where they get to talk about the names of their siblings. And in fact, they may even extend themselves further and talk about ages, for example, which is not on the grid, and they're going to have to do from memory. So again, a nice way to kind of differentiate the outcome in a way, but really the children are supported to all produce the same thing if they want to. The content is, the support for that content is just different. And of course, these can be used as writing frames as well for children if they need it afterwards. Moving on slightly from these kind of scaffolds, what I also like to do is to allow children to build their sentences and to manipulate their sentences in order to give them a bit more freedom to make mistakes, because the speaking and listening, the speaking and writing grids give them a really good structure and framework. Here they've got a little bit more freedom, so that we can use manipulatives in the case of these cards, for example, these color-coded cards, where each of the word types has a different color. So our verbs again in red. The children can then use these cards to create their sentences based on the model or independently, depending on how you want them to do it. And what they can then do is move the word cards around so that if they feel that a sentence is incorrect or they're not quite happy with it, they want to change it, they can do that before they have to put pen to paper. And we can do the same thing again here. This is seen with blocks, so the children just write on the blocks and they create their own sentence in very much the same way. And again, they can move things around if they're not happy with them. I find color coding is really, really helpful. So as a bare minimum, I always color code my masculine nouns in blue and my feminine nouns in red to really help children again with that understanding, because at the end of the day, grammatical structures do differ in different languages, and that can be quite challenging for children who have SEND, for example. This is an example from Flippity. Flippity is not actually working currently to create new content, but you can use things that you've already created. But I am mentioning it in case it does come back online as such again, because it is such a brilliant resource, and you can use the manipulatives here to create a sentence as you wish on the board, or children could do this on their own laptops. Okay, so again, it's kind of a virtual way of allowing them to create their own sentences through word cards. Knowledge organisers I'm going to mention again for scaffolding, because these are really popular at the moment, but I think they're also very useful. And also I think they're something that we've been doing for a very, very long time. They've just probably were called something different. And they're very useful for things like retrieval practice, which we'll mention in a couple of minutes. Because they have all of the information, all of the content from a particular session, a particular unit of work, all in one place on one side of A4. And as long as the children are trained to use them properly, which is a really key thing, they can be very, very helpful. So we've thought about differentiation by content. Now let's move on to differentiation by process. So we've thought about how we're going to scaffold for learners to access the content, but how can we ensure that they process this content as effectively as possible so that it sticks? And that's where the differentiation by process comes in. So what can we do to differentiate by process? Well, we can think about our groupings. Mixed ability pairings have been proven to be very, very effective in terms of raising levels of attainment for children with SEND. That doesn't mean that we want them working in mixed ability pairs all the time necessarily, but it's something that we can really think about if we want children to have a really strong model in terms of their speaking, their listening, someone who can support them with their learning. We all know that songs and rhymes are a really powerful tool for embedding new language, and that's really helpful for SEND pupils. And again, it's something, just like I mentioned at the beginning, that we do very naturally as part of our practice. So that can be very, very helpful. Often children with SEND process information slightly more slowly, which we've mentioned already, and therefore it's really important to give them sufficient thinking time when we're asking them questions. And that's great if you give the children thinking time when they're in the middle of a class setting, when you're doing quick fire questions, but also it can be quite stressful because then you're sort of waiting in silence for somebody to give an answer, and that can be quite difficult for all children. So what I tend to do is to try and pre-ask questions. So during a paired session or an individual session, I'll go around and say to the children, I'm going to ask you this question when we come back to the whole group session. And I'll help them to create their answer, or they can create their answer collaboratively with a partner. And that can be really helpful in allowing them to know what's coming up and know that they're going to be asked a question, but give them that thinking time as part of the lesson. Linked to this, it can be quite tricky if you don't have your own class, but pre-teaching children can be very helpful. So pre-teaching vocabulary, for example, I'm using this example from Flipperty, which I hope you'll all be able to see. It's really great because it has flashcards. So as I click on this, it will tell me that this is l'aubergine, and it will show me a picture. And there's lots and lots of different activities, or there should be, if Flipperty ever gets up and running, lots and lots of different activities that the children can use to practice that vocabulary ahead of the lesson, so that they're ahead on what they're going to be learning. And of course, allowing children partner talk time during discussions, especially after questioning. So I really like to set quite open-ended discussion activities. So for example, I might put some sentences on the board and ask the children to work out what the grammatical rule is, for example, and give reasons for their choices. And giving them opportunities to discuss together, especially if they're in those mixed ability pairings, is really helpful for getting them to think about the what they're accessing and what they're supposed to be learning. So we've supported the content of delivery of the curriculum for those pupils, those SEND pupils, and we've made sure that we've given them lots of opportunities to process that learning through effective questioning and through groupings and through paired talk time. And now we need to think about what their output is going to be. So we need to think about what they're going to be doing in terms of individual activities during a lesson, and also what they're going to be giving as output by the end of the unit. So what are the children's outcomes going to be? So differentiation by product comes in here, and this is where we start thinking about what the children are going to be producing. Here we've got an example of a retrieval grid activity, and as I mentioned already, I really like to keep activities open-ended so that the children can extend themselves as they feel confident. And this is an idea that I got from Catriona Egan, who published something about retrievals, an article about retrieval in the Languages Today magazine, which some of you may be familiar with. Here the boxes are color coded. So the red boxes, which are worth 1 point, are a fairly simple translation from French to English. The 2 pointers, which are the orange boxes, again, they're translations from French to English, but they're a little bit more complex. And then the yellow boxes and the green boxes are translations from English to French, which is more challenging, and so they are worth more points. And you set the children a time, and the children translate as many of the boxes as they can within that set time. Some children are going to just stick to the red boxes, that's fine. Some children will extend themselves all the way up to the green. Some children will do it with the help of knowledge organisers to help them with spellings. Some children will do it completely independently. But what's great about this is all children are enabled to produce something, but what they're doing, what they are producing, will vary from pupil to pupil. Another idea linked to this is l'échelle, the stepladder game, which again came from an original idea by Miss May MFL, who writes a wonderful blog about secondary MFL teaching, but many of the ideas can be differentiated down for primary. The children all start with a counter at the bottom of the grid, and each child has a translation grid. This is the translation grid of partner A, and partner B will have a different translation grid. Partner A will start at the bottom of the grid and say to their partner, how do you say a cat in French? And hopefully their partner will respond, un chat, so they can then move themselves up the step ladder. Then partner B, using their sheet, will say to partner A, well, how do you say a dog in French? And hopefully that person will reply un chien, and they will move up. The translations become more and more tricky as you go up the ladder. So of course, once children start to get to tricky things and start making mistakes, they will start dropping back down to the bottom again. So it's an opportunity for them to revise learning at their level. It's a sort of self-differentiating task, if you like, which allows them to look at vocabulary, familiar vocabulary, revise that vocabulary, but in increasingly complex ways. So all of the children will be able to access the learning, because if the children, for example, aren't confident to translate into French, the children could always have a French to English translation, so their partner could say to them, what's un chat in English? So it's got many, many levels of differentiation, but ultimately all children are enabled to recap the language and structures at their individual level. And you've probably realised by now that I really prefer to have one resource which works for all learners. And this translation pyramid is just one example. This comes from Simo Graf on Twitter, who again is a really fabulous primary and secondary. She works in primary and secondary, but produced this really great pyramid where basically the children start off at the top. I say to them a translation. In this case, the translation is going into French, but you could speak in French and get them to translate into English. I like, and they would write j'aime. I like basketball, j'aime le basket. So it's building up the phrases, and the children are doing the translation all the way down to a very, very tricky translation right at the bottom. Some children will stop halfway through the pyramid, and that's fine. Some of them will go all the way to the end. But again, the children are all accessing the same learning. They're just doing it up until the point that they feel confident as they note down. Okay, so a listening activity, the children write down what they are hearing into the correct boxes at their level of complexity. So we've done lots of talking, and now the children are ready for writing. And I always make sure that there are plenty of opportunities to practice vocabulary and structures many, many times, as we've already said, which is really important for SEND learners before they start putting pen to paper. But this can still be a challenge. So I really want to support them and enable them to produce the best writing that they possibly can. And so what I tend to do is use something similar to this marking ticket that I've got on here, whereby we've got the orange challenge. The children are writing about weather in this case. I've used the progression statements from Sue Cave's fantastic progression grid, which is freely available on her website. So they're here in the orange challenge, the children can write weather phrases with the help of a knowledge organizer. So they're not having to write from memory, extend their sentences with e, so they're starting to extend with the conjunction, and they're describing weather in different cities. But if they want to challenge themselves, they're going to try and do that from memory. They're going to extend using e and me, so they're going to use two different conjunctions, and they're going to not just talk about weather in cities, but they're also going to use their knowledge of compass directions. So children can decide, well, I just want to stick to the orange challenge. I'm not sure how to do compass directions yet, but it might be that they think, well, actually, I don't want to just do cities. I want to challenge myself. And this gives them a really clear indication of how they can do that. So we've got simpler statements and more complex statements. Now, a very wise colleague, and we're just coming to the end now, so we have time for a question and answer. So if you've got any questions, you could start thinking about popping those into the Q&A. I can see some are there already. A very, very wise colleague once told me that children are not slow learners, but they are quick forgetters. So, and for some SEND pupils in particular, making knowledge stick can be the really, really tricky part. It can be a real uphill battle. And the key is, of course, to revisit prior learning as much as possible in small chunks. And we know that Ofsted are going to be looking at children remembering more. What can they remember? Why are they remembering more? How have you structured your planning? These were all questions that I had again during my deep dive a couple of weeks ago. So what we want to do is we want to use our starter activities, for example, to really enable our children to remember key vocabulary. Now, of course, we're going to have to adapt our activities. Some SEND pupils might, for example, not like whole group big revision sessions, so working in smaller groups, for example, but we really need to make sure that we're using anything that we can, spinners, dice, Jenga, anything that makes learning fun, that they can revisit as often as possible. This is an example of an elimination grid. So I fire questions to the class. The children, if they get right, say the answer correctly, can put their name onto the grid, but there's only 4 spaces. Once those 4 spaces are filled, they start knocking others off, and the aim is to be on the board at the end of a set time. Ultimately, though, developing an MFL classroom which supports SEND children and allows them to flourish is all about knowing them as individuals, knowing their needs. Because, of course, what works well for one won't work for everyone, but it's essential that we really take the time out to find out how best to support these individual pupils, liaising with class teachers if we're not in class all the time, and SENCOs within our school as necessary. And of course, anything that we do to support SEND learners within the classroom will also have a positive impact on the learning of the whole class. So thank you for listening so fantastically. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that I can access the Q&A and have a look at some of the questions that we've got coming in today. So the link for the noise level monitor, if you just search, and it's really, really simple to find, if you just search classroomscreen.com, so all one word, classroomscreen.com, then that will take you to the noise monitor. So it's classroomscreen.com, and I will write that into the chat as well. So hopefully everyone can see that. Carmen has asked, Brown Bear speaking and writing, I assume they are using the help sheet when doing this rather than from memory. Yes, so they're using the grid to help them when they're doing their speaking activities, and the children might use that for their writing activity as well. So they could well use that when they're writing. Some children might feel really confident having used that speaking grid to help them. They may feel confident to start writing things from memory, but yes, they're absolutely allowed to use that to support their sentence structure if they feel they need it. The name of the author who made L'échelle is Miss May MFL. I'll write it into the chat as well. It is Miss May MFL, and she writes, as we mentioned, a really good blog on general things for the secondary classroom, but also works really well for primary. Are there some templates for L'échelle, the triangle and 3-colored grid that you use? Yes, I can send those. That's not a problem at all. If you drop me an email, and my email appeared on the very first screen, but I will put it back again if you need to. I am happy to send any of the resources that have been shown today, and those can be sent via email to you. So if you want to drop me an email, I'm just going to have to go back through my slides quickly to make sure that I've got the right screen to show you. But if you drop me an email, I can send any of these things from today, and that's not a problem at all. Sorry about this, everyone. It's taking me just a minute to get right back to the beginning of my slides. All of my contact information is on there, and also my information about my blog and other things that you may want to have a look at. So I'll share that now. Lovely. I'm assuming that you can't see the Q&A, but I will move it out of the way just in case. Okay. And how would you assess the SEND pupils? A different test or the same with graded questions? Right. So if I am looking at trying to assess the children, what I do is I tend to use a little quick quiz, I call it, which has got speaking, listening, reading and writing assessed. And I tend to try and differentiate the questions. So we start off with a simpler question and go through to slightly trickier ones. In terms of differentiation, I don't let anybody use their knowledge organisers when we're doing an assessment, because I think I want to see what they can actually do independently. And the aim really is just to see, can those SEND pupils access the simpler questions in the assessment, and can they extend themselves further? But I'm happy to send an example of one of my assessment grids if you drop me an email, and I can do that without any problem whatsoever. Right. How do you deal with children that have a non-language specialist language assistant? Yes, this is very, very difficult. What you have to try and do, I find, is just to really, really get that that person on board. The aim is for them to be able to support during lessons. So they need to be listening to all of the language input that you give, and they need to be showing you, this is the assistant, that they are able to join in with that. And I'm very lucky because anybody who has a one-to-one that I work with, they are very good at engaging with the language that we're learning, and really they're just going to have to try and do their best. And what I tend to try and do is sort of work with them a little bit as well. So I'll come over, check that the child is pronouncing correctly, check that their one-to-one is pronouncing correctly, and they will be joining in with the same activity, but I'll just have to make sure that I go and check that it's all being done accurately, really, which is really important. But it's just about encouraging the child, encouraging the adult as well, because the adult may not feel 100% confident, encouraging them, giving lots of praise and just saying, yeah, that's brilliant, well done, and really enabling them and empowering them. But in a way, they are just going to have to try and get on with it, with that child, but again, with support from you, try and be that supportive presence for them in the classroom as well. Okay, lovely. So let's see, someone's left an email address, that's fine. Could you email me, and then I will be able to, with your request for whatever it is that you want, and I'm happy to send anything else out now. Okay, have we got any other questions? We've had about 8 or 9 questions. Anybody else got anything that they would like to add or share before we finish? I'm happy to answer any other questions. So it's quiet. Let's just check the chat quickly. Sorry, you can't see my email. My email is on the screen, should be sharing now. On the first slide that I've got underneath my title of my presentation. Okay, lovely. Right, well, if we have no further questions, oh, hang on, we've just had a couple of things into the chat. Yeah, I think I've answered all of the questions verbally, because people who watch afterwards won't be able to see any answers that are written into the Q&A. So I've done them all verbally, but yeah, drop me a line if there's anything that you're not sure about. And do you have any suggestions for very low ability that are struggling even to write in English? Yes, I've got quite a lot of those. One of the really, really big things is to really concentrate on their verbal communication. So it may be that they're not going to be able to produce lots and lots of writing, just as they're not able to produce lots and lots of writing in English. So really concentrating in on those verbal skills. And if you are doing a writing lesson where pupils are producing sentences, for example, or a larger chunk of writing as they get higher up the school, I tend to do a lot of things like matching activities, so using images and text so the children can match things together, for example. That works really well, so that they're enabled to access the activity on a level, but they're not actually really doing any writing. It's more of a reading and recognition sort of activity for them. So it's just about adapting those activities in the best way that you possibly can. But it may be that they won't produce lots of writing in the language lesson. Okay, lovely. Well, we have 1 minute to spare, so we've kept beautifully to time. Thank you, everyone. It's been a real pleasure to present to you today. Thank you so much for coming. And I am now going to end the session and just say a huge thank you for being a fabulous audience. I hope that what we did today was helpful, and wishing you all the very best. Please get in touch if you need anything from today's session. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you, everyone. Bye.